Hello. We are excited for this. We don't have any fancy intro music or anything yet. Maybe we'll do that at some point. But I'm Robbie McCombs, joined by my co-host Ryan Rasmussen. We're excited to kick off the Rise and Hoop podcast. I know, Ryan, you talked about this a few months ago. You brought it up, and we're just kind of busy points in our life. But we're BYU just beat Kansas. We're excited. We want to get something together. So excited to reconnect with you and through this BYU basketball podcast venture.
Absolutely, man. I feel like we kind of were just waiting for just a really good win and make an easy first episode for us to talk about, right? Something
Yeah.
not much negative to go on about the team right now. I think it's pretty much all positive stuff. So it's a good game to kick off talking about the team.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like we texted each other before the game. Let's do this. We'll do it after the Kansas game, and the BYU just happened to have an amazing blowout versus Kansas. So we might have willed the BYU basketball gods a little bit to make it how we did. So I guess just to start, Ryan and I can introduce ourselves a little bit, like how we know each other and who we are. So I think our story kind of goes back. We met at BYU, like after our missions, like that fall 2013 semester, or winter 2014 semester. Yeah, because I guess you came back a year after. You were a semester after when you came back your mission.
Yeah.
So we were in the same ward at Liberty Square and just kind of got to know each other there. And then we really got to know each other like the BYU Nebraska game in 2015. Like we just on a whim decided to do the road trip 13 hours from Provo to Lincoln with Garrett McClintock was driving the car, I think, most of the way. And then we experienced that and then just have stayed in touch ever since. We had our episode in 2016. We watched literally 3 straight days of March Madness and we were physically ill. So we've prepared for this moment.
Yeah, we've definitely been bred to talk about hoops, I think. So, yeah, man, it was it's kind of funny how that all happened. Where we kind of knew that we liked sports. Like we both knew we were kind of big BYU fans. I was roommates with Carson, who's obviously one of our buddies and big fan as well, and Derek. We kind of I think Derek had like an in on some extra Cougar Club Nebraska tickets, and it was like it was months before, and I think you texted us, you're like, hey, we can get 4 tickets, do you guys want to go with us? And me and Carson were just like, yeah, like we didn't know you super well. And then I think that's from that trip, Garrett was like a last minute. That's when I met Garrett, actually, was he pulled up to pick us up at Alpine Village at like 5 a.m. on a Friday or something.
Yeah.
And it's just like we like hop in, and it's like there's just this fully bearded, like he looks like he's like 30, and I'm kind of like, who's this adult that's like that's going on this trip with us?
Yeah, because he graduated a year before, so he just graduated, and we were like pretty much in our last year at BYU, and he was our chaperone for the trip.
Yeah. Made sure we made it there and back safely, and so man, it's been a ride. It's crazy. That's like over 10 years ago now. It's crazy how time.
Yeah. Now you're in San Antonio. I'm in Seattle, and we're now connecting virtually with just technology. So excited. So I guess we kind of maybe just hop into it. So obviously had the big Kansas game last night because I was writing before it. I was on Vanquish the Foe. So I'm the editor, obviously, Vanquish the Foe, and then do Give 'em Hell Brigham with Garrett and Jeff. And going into the game, obviously Kansas, before the season, Kansas, they had so many expectations. They were preseason number 1. They had Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, DeJuan Harris, that core, and they brought in some like really good transfers. Even the first month of November, they won a neutral site at Duke, who's the number 2 team. They beat Michigan State, who's top 15. They beat North Carolina. It was a little disappointing, but had some really good November wins. But in Big 12 play, they've kind of been up and down. Like they blew a game versus Houston they should have won, and then right before they lost to Utah, and I think that's when Kansas fans and national people are like, hey, this what's kind of going on with this Kansas team. But, it's still Kansas. They were, I think statistically, I mean, even though they've been down this year, some of their transfers haven't been working out. They got AJ Storr from Wisconsin. He's been a big disappointment this year, but still, like, even like I was looking like their Ken Palm rankings going into the game, they were number 2 in the Big 12 in defensive efficiency and middle of the pack Big 12. So, and think about it, there's some really good Big 12 defensive team. Like Houston's number 1. We know what Houston is. Iowa State's known for their defense. Arizona's good, but Kansas's defense is ranked above those teams. So I thought going in, especially Kansas decided to go with a big lineup, and we saw earlier with the Utah game, like Utah kind of gave BYU some problems with their size down low with Lawson Lovering, Ezra Asar, Keanu Dawes off their bench. I was like, I thought BYU's going to win. It's like Kansas, they're really good defensively. They're going to go big. How will BYU respond? And BYU just everything went right. Like Kansas, I think things were going wrong with Kansas, but BYU's defense was really good at Kansas. They packed the paint, forced Kansas to shoot. The game plan was perfect. Kansas doesn't have a lot of shooters, but just what BYU did at Kansas's defense was super impressive. Like no one's done that to Kansas's defense this year. So I think kind of the national narrative is, yeah, Kansas, they're kind of down. Their team there's no team chemistry, but defense travels, and BYU just eviscerated their defense. They had open threes. Like Kibo had Hunter Dickinson in a blender. So, and that's kind of just some of my high level thoughts going into the game. And then BYU just did to Kansas's defense. Really, honestly, no one has done this year. So that was super impressive on both sides of the ball. Like defensively was good, but defense was Kansas's strength, and BYU just did so well on that.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like the way that BYU even just like offensively pushed tempo, like that was the best I think I've seen us play in terms of we didn't always get ourselves caught in like a half court set, but we also didn't like push the tempo unnecessarily or like turn the ball over, like trying to make something happen quick. I feel like we had that as an option. There's a lot of, hey, let's push it. Like to your point of they had a lot of bigs out on the court. They're not maybe as mobile with, because we started with more just our typical lineup where like Keba's out there as your big. Outside of that, then it's like more guard play and forward play than having like any other like larger bigs out there. I felt like that worked pretty well. Just from what I saw, it felt like that was the best flowing that I saw of that we've played this year, at least from what I've seen that I could recall. Just really good in trying to push the ball up the court, but if there wasn't anything there, we'd work out into a half court offense, see what we could find. But just throughout the game, having that option. I listened to, I think it was Richie Saunders was talking about how, they preach take a half second, like make a decision in like a half second kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're seeing that decision making is clicking, not just like on an individual level, but like the team is kind of starting to gel in that way. And I feel like that came together as part of the offensive plan to attack their defense.
Yeah, cause like the offense has really come around because like the beginning of the year, I mean, BYU played like crap teams the first month of the season, but like that Providence game was really like the first game where BYU got exposed. Like the offense just like
Completely.
had no flow, and I think part of it, like I talked to Kevin Young before the year for like my BYU preview magazine. I talked to him for like an hour, and one thing like like he said a lot of really positive things about the team, and he was really confident. But my one concern kind of like I think he underestimated the transition going to college. It almost felt like his mindset was, I'm going from varsity to JV, and like I'm gonna outsmart all these guys. And I think in a lot of those ways, like he will. But it's a different game, honestly, like college, the NBA. Like he even mentioned it kind of to Greg Wrubell, like in post game, the West Virginia game, like just the amount of contact college officiating, specifically the Big 12 allows. Like Egor, when he comes off pick and rolls, a lot of teams will have their hands on the hips, and that kind of prohibits him from going to the basket. I think the first couple months he really struggled with that physicality coming from Europe, and he played for Real Madrid, but he wasn't playing for like the top league in Real Madrid. He was playing against like teenagers his age. I think Kevin Young had adjusted to that too. It's the NBA with the freedom of movement. Point guards don't have that, which I think that's one of Egor, I think, is almost better suited for the NBA game in some ways, just because of the NBA spacing and the lack of contact. I think he had trouble with that, but he's adjusted to that, and just the amount of like physicality, the lack of spacing. There's not as many shooters in college. I think Kevin Young had to adjust that. And there's really good coaches in college. So I think Kevin Young he almost was overconfident, I think, coming in a little bit. But we've seen the last month, he's adjusted really well. And that Kansas game was just perfect coaching on both sides of the ball. So that's what's been encouraging to me. Like Kevin Young, he's literally one of the best basketball minds in the world. Like he was the highest paid assistant in the NBA. Like he would have gotten the job with the Brooklyn Nets, but I mean, he's at BYU. So like this is, as far as like realistic coach BYU could get, like he's the best basketball pedigree, but it was an adjustment to college. But it's exciting. He's learning now. And we don't have to talk about next season, but with just the foundation this could create for next season, it's just exciting to see the team starting to, I think, kind of get his vision where before they weren't really sure what they're doing. So offensively is really clicking. Defensively is not quite as consistent, but with like there's defenses seems like they're getting better. They're not as leaving quite as many open shooters. Rotations are getting better. So that's what's exciting about this BYU team. I think like historically for a lot of BYU's success, like BYU does not do well in March. Like BYU's tournament is abysmal. So the hope is, hey, maybe BYU's peaking at this time, and maybe we could get a win in March, peaking at the right time. I think that's what's exciting to me, and what we're seeing kind of coming from this Kansas game.
I like that you mentioned that. Question for you: What team? We know what happened last year, but which team? Like right now, if you could pick to run last year's team into the tournament this year, or stick with this team, which one would you pick? We don't know how this season's going to pan like the rest. Like that's the question area. Like, but I'm curious, which team do you feel more confident moving into March with?
I think this team, just because there's some better individual players. That last year's team, it was like the perfect BYU model under non-extraordinary circumstances. When I say like before this year, last year in the NIL era, BYU didn't have massive NIL pledging to Mark Pope. So the key was our differentiation point is going to be continuity and guys that really love BYU. So they brought back a ton of their team. They had Richie, they had Dallin, they had Trevin, some of those BYU guys returned. Jackson Robinson returned. Noah Waterman came back. So that was BYU secret sauce. So like the first couple months of the season, especially BYU got up to number 1 in net, like in the non-conference season at one point. I think it's because all these teams
out a bunch of bad teams. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think that was kind of the BYU secret sauce. It's like, hey, all these teams, while they're bringing in transfers, we're going to do continuity, and that could be a differentiation point. And I thought, hey, that's going to be BYU's path moving forward, just because in my mind, I think we all had like an artificial ceiling in our minds. Like BYU gets to a Sweet 16, that's an historic year for BYU. And I thought, okay, that's BYU's secret sauce. But now with this, I mean, Kevin Young, it got started later in the offseason. They had a month. They came in April, so he couldn't have a full transfer portal season, but he was still able to get Egor, which was important because Egor's really good, but as he wanted to build his NBA pipeline, he wanted like a future lottery pick, which I think Egor is going to be that. So he got Egor, got some of those guys, but there's this better individual talent like Egor. Just his passing, he's the best passer in the Big 12 and one of the best in the country. Just what he could do is so unique. And someone like Mawot Mag, like BYU was pretty good last year defensively as a team, but they didn't just have like a team could just isolate BYU. We saw that in the Duquesne game. Duquesne had 2 really good guards, and BYU couldn't shut him down. What we've seen with Mawot Mag, that's a differentiator versus last year's team. Because for example, you put a Mag on Javon Small, like one of the Big 12's best players, like last week in West Virginia. He shut him down. Against Kansas State, you put him on Doug McDaniel, 5'11" guard. Mawot Mag did really good on him. So you put Mawot Mag on anyone 1 through 4, and he maybe doesn't take him out of the game. He makes it really difficult for them. So you have Egor who's a differentiator, who's a good individual player. You have Mawot Mag, who defensively can take the best player. So it's not just a team defense. Like he could go against the best defender where they try to isolate him. And then obviously Richie Saunders is probably going to be second team all Big 12 last year. And BYU didn't have that last year. You had Jackson Robinson, who was good. He was the sixth man of the year, obviously in the Big 12, but he still shot sub 30% from three in Big 12 play, and just he obviously did phenomenal in the Duquesne game. But Richie Saunders is better than anyone on last year's team. You got Kaba, one of the most athletic big men in the country. We've seen his defense, particularly the last couple games, and rebounding. So I would take this year's team. Like last year's had the continuity, but we saw as other teams that maybe were more transfer portal reliant kind of caught up to BYU towards the end of the season. By the end of the season, BYU is kind of winning a game, losing a game, which is still really difficult to do in the Big 12, not to take away from last year's team. But they were kind of just tapped out by the end of the year. Whereas this team, just with all the good individual pieces, as they're learning each other, like it keeps growing more. Like this team's not tapped out. So for those reasons, I would take this team. I don't know if you disagree, but I just think there's better individual pieces, whereas March could kind of become an individual game at some point. Like over the season, it's like macro trends, like, hey, this is my 3-point percentage for the year or whatever. But in March, sometimes you need a guy to get a stop. You need a guy to get a bucket. And I feel like BYU's got more of those guys this year than they did last year.
Yeah, 100%. No, that was my takeaway. I think if you asked me at the start of Big 12 play, even like we started Big 12 play, was it 2-4? Is that what we got to, like at our lowest kind of thing?
I mean, we lost to TCU after the Utah game. I think people were like, "Is Kevin Young going to work?" Totally. That was kind of the question people were asking.
That's what people are definitely thinking, and I definitely arrived at. I think that's where anybody, like, you're going to want to think what's going on, like, you know, I don't like this, especially after botching, like you mentioned, the Providence game. We lost to Ole Miss. Like, we didn't really capitalize on the few good teams that we played. It just kind of you felt like, well, we were close in one game, we got blown out in this other game. Yeah, losing at Utah, some tough breaks there, but you're kind of going, what is this team gonna make the tournament? Where are we heading? There wasn't like a clear. I don't feel like there was a clear trend for the first 15. Forgive me on the exact number, 15 or so games, like the whole pre-conference schedule, and then those first 4 to 6 conference games. You kind of felt like, you know, I don't know where we're going. Yeah, we're losing at Utah. We kind of gave the game away against TCU and Texas Tech to some extent, right? So you can see some good things, but it was a little bit tricky in terms of, what's going on? What is going to be our outcome here? And I think it's funny as you're talking. I thought last year's team, I think, started out really hot, like you mentioned, up at like top number 1 in net. We stayed really high in the net, even as we struggled a little bit in Big 12 play at times. Whereas I felt like the team came out hot. We looked really good, especially like after a very underwhelming last season in the West Coast Conference. I did not really have I'd had very low expectations for the team. Like, honestly, especially coming into the Big 12, you're like, if we're finishing, I think we had 5 or 6 losses in.
Finished 5th the last year in the WCC.
Yeah, so you're like, okay, if we finish 5th there, what are we going to finish in the Big 12? Even with, you know, like you said, I'm like, hey, I get the continuity that Mark Pope was kind of like, hey, let's bring the team back, like we're getting more experience. That's been BYU's bread and butter forever, right? Like literally, that's as long as I've been a fan. That's what we've seen with the team, is kind of have a dip, and then you have that special season when your really good players are in their junior, senior seasons, and that's kind of when you're hoping to make a little run. Whereas this team, it's kind of the opposite. Like I was saying, felt like a little directionless, or a little bit like up in the air. Where are we going? What is our identity? We're beating the bad teams or the not as good teams, but it's not because of continuity, and it's not because of we're just like have an amazing scheme on defense or offense that the team is dialed in on. It's just that
they could just roll the ball out and they would have beat them just because they're so much more talented. Yeah.
And initially, right, that's where even Egor and Catchings, they had lots of good flashes where you're like, hey, I can see how good these two players are specifically. Then kind of entering the beginning of Big 12 play, they've struggled a little bit more. Like you mentioned, I think just the level of physicality, those kinds of things. But to me, it's been super encouraging just seeing, hey, that shows me, to your point, like Kevin Young's basketball mind. I mean, it was on full clinic against Kansas. Doesn't necessarily mean he's like out coaching and out scheming Bill Self, but like what happened on the court, definitely he outcoached and outclassed what happened on the court. Obviously, Bill Self, incredible coach, pedigree and everything. So, I mean, but you can tell, like, there's things there, and I think we're seeing a stretch of play here where you're kind of like, the team's looking the best we have all season. Last year, even after the win at Kansas, like, it felt good. I was actually at that game, and it was awesome. Like, it was a crazy win. It definitely didn't feel like we controlled the game.
You went to that Kansas game last year?
Uh-huh.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. Yeah, we were there. Went with Spencer and Danny, and it was a good time. Like, cool venue. And it was like, I mean, it was a down to the wire game. Like, we edged it out, I think, in there. The last, like, 3 minutes.
Dallin hit that late step back to kind of seal it over Hunter. Yeah.
I think, and then I think Waterman had a pretty clutch 3 down the stretch too.
Yeah.
But,
shout out to Noah.
Yeah, shout out. Once a Coug, always a Coug, right? So yeah, it's just but it's kind of cool seeing, even with all of that last year, I think this team is heading in a better direction. I think this team's ceiling is higher. But it's kind of been cool to see the pieces got us along at the beginning. We had some bumps in the road because like you said, we definitely have higher talent ceiling across the board. I think, like, this year's starting 5, incredibly talented. And then, I mean, Dallin Hall's coming off the bench, talented, right? He was our guy. Like, he was like heart and soul of the team, more or less, in terms of everything ran through him for the most part last year. So it's kind of that gives you a taste of what's the talent level we're dealing with. But it's cool seeing, I think that surge is coming as the messaging is getting through. Guys are starting to be more confident in their decision making on both sides of the ball. Because Kevin's asking a lot of them. I'm not as detailed on, like, all the X's and O's, but on defense, you can tell, like, they're switching a lot between, hey, we're going to run this kind of, like, switching between man and zone, different types of zones. You can see the different looks that they're cycling through. Yeah. And I mean, that's just defense, let alone kind of the offense hunting for switches. I love, I mean, there was a great switch where it was, like you said, when Dallin Hall hit the 3 over Dickinson last year, he had that matchup again, like, middle of the second half, right? Yeah. And you're just like, he's got to do it. But like, it was really cool to see he swung it over. I can't remember if it was to Nell or to Saunders or somebody, but since he had Dickinson on him, Foose had a total mismatch, and they ended up feeding the ball down to him, and he got an easy 2. So it was cool seeing, like, you can see both sides of the ball. The team at large is getting the concepts and is buying into the mind of Kevin Young and his game plan, the staff's game plan. And so for those reasons, I think, just like you mentioned, already have the higher talent ceiling, but then as the coaching and the game plan and the scheming is is getting through to the players. I mean, that's where I feel like, for me, it's not a question. I take this team going into March over last year's team.
No, absolutely. And if we're looking ahead to, like, next game, Arizona, like, obviously we saw what BYU did. The last Arizona game was interesting. It wasn't that long ago because BYU, they were coming on the heels of a winning streak. BYU had won 4 in a row. They'd beaten Baylor 2 games before. They beat UCF. So those were 2 one wins at the time. So, like, BYU's playing really well. We knew Arizona was really good. In that first, like, 30 minutes of the game, BYU hung around. I remember
totally
Cannon got catching set of 3, like 10 minutes left to put BYU up 61-60, but BYU's offense, like, died for, like, the next 6 minutes. But Arizona's just like honestly, I felt pretty good BYU was going to beat Kansas because, Kansas, I mean, they're struggling right now, but they have talent. Like, just what they do is exactly what BYU does well against. Like, Kansas, they're really good defensively, but they don't turn you over. And BYU's offense, they're really good shooting, but turnovers have been kind of BYU's Achilles heel when they've struggled this year. BYU had only 10 turnovers versus Kansas. So my thought was, like, hey, BYU, they don't turn the ball over. Like, Kansas is going to make things tough. BYU's offense could do well. And Kansas didn't really make things tough. And they didn't turn the ball BYU over, so BYU did well. And defensively, BYU's strategy mostly this year is pack the paint, we're going to allow lightly contested threes to the types of shooters we want to shoot. And Kansas they do not want to shoot threes. They shoot the least amount of threes in the Big 12. They start 3 people in their starting lineup who can't shoot. Well, last night they started 4 people in their starting lineup they can't shoot. So honestly, it was exactly BYU. Yeah, we'll pack the paint. We'll guard Zeke Mayo and everyone else can shoot. And Kansas, like, their offense was out of sorts. So it is honestly like the perfect for a good team. It was like tailor made to the team BYU does well against. But Arizona is tough. Like they have size, they have shooting. Like last game, their starting front court's like Toby Owaka, like their starting center, who's a Tennessee transfer. He's number 1 in the country in offensive rebounding. Like he's super good offensive rebounder. Killed BYU in the glass last game. So like that's going to be a big key. Like BYU has to rebound much better. Like, Kiba's done really well in the glass last game. So that honestly to me may be the most important matchup. Like Kiba versus Toby Owaka. Like, can Kiba hold his own? Like, even on the offensive glass, but just not allow Owaka just to get all these offensive rebounds. And then Kansas, their other center they bring off Vesar is a 7-footer. So those are the type of teams that give BYU struggles, like with athletic front court players. Like Houston destroyed BYU with their front court, Juwan Roberts and Joseph Tugler. But they do it differently. They force a lot of turnovers. Arizona doesn't necessarily try to force a lot of turnovers, but they have really athletic front court players. They have a lot of different types of long wings they could throw at Egor just to kind of give him issues. And then you have Caleb Love at guard, who's last year's the Pac-12 Player of the Year, and he's kind of the wild card. He's been up and down this year, but the last month he's been playing really well. He's the type of guy late in shot clock, your defense is good, and he just shoots it over your zone or whatever it may be, and that kind of killed BYU last time. So honestly, I think the Arizona game's probably at Arizona is probably the second toughest game for BYU this year. I think at Houston was the toughest game, and BYU got destroyed then. I mean, Houston's just good, and BYU wasn't playing well. Honestly, like the last 2 toughest games are at Arizona and at Iowa State. Like honestly, I think that Arizona is just a harder matchup for BYU because I think their bigs are a tougher matchup for BYU. I just think Iowa State has good guards, but Caleb Love just has a higher ceiling than anyone offensively for Iowa. So honestly, like I would be surprised if BYU win this game. Like I know BYU shot out of their minds versus Kansas, but Arizona is one of the toughest places to play. It's probably them and BYU probably the toughest places to play in out west. And like Arizona is one of the toughest places to play in the country. I mean, last time BYU did go to Arizona was 2009 when Jimmer scored 49 points versus Arizona. So maybe there's some good karma that Arizona, we could get. But Arizona's just tough. Like one thing, they don't turn you over a ton, which should play into BYU's favor. Maybe BYU, if they don't turn it over, that you can get enough shots up, and hopefully some of them go down. You have a good shooting night. But just their front court with Owaka and Vesar is just so tough. Caleb Love is good. They got good wings with Lewis and some of their other guys. I would be surprised. Like if BYU wins this game, it's like, hey, then we're talking about like BYU's for sure in the tournament at that point. Right. Probably looking at maybe like starting to look at like a 7 seed. You could like, hey, BYU could get like a good first round matchup. So it's like if BYU does so the loss doesn't really hurt you, but a win you're like what could be. But I think for those reasons, like Arizona's going to be a tough. I don't know if you see it differently because maybe BYU's riding momentum, but I think it's just this is like I think BYU's hardest game remaining of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree. I mean, it's a pretty clear cut when you even look at the standings. I mean, West Virginia is kind of in the pack, like with BYU. They're in that good zone, right? Like I think it's pretty obvious in the Big 12. Like I was kind of looking, BYU's
kind of your top 4.
Like BYU's the 5th seed, so we're top 5. But there's a clear line at 4, right? Like as good as we've played this last game and as good as we're looking. Now, to your point, right, I mean, hey, you go in and you do beat Arizona. If we go on a good tear and maybe if you could rattle off 4 wins of your last 5, then you could definitely say, okay, there's a top 5 in the Big 12. And it's not kind of that 4 and then a couple other teams that are tournament worthy and that could do something, but not like they're actually looking at like Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final 4 type runs. So I think, I think I agree with you when you mentioned that game. I just kind of pulled up Awaka and Vasir, they combined, so those two bigs you talked about, they combined for 14 of 18 against us, and they had 14 and 17 points, so 31 points combined on like very high percentage shooting. And we only lost that game by like 11. And so, and if I recall, did Love end up kind of firing off that last 10 minutes or so of the game? Did he kind of start hitting
I feel like
shots?
he had some big threes. Like, it was close, like, the whole, like, 30 minutes. I
Whole
feel like
game.
it just seemed like BYU just kind of ran out of gas, honestly. Like, their offense kept going, and we just couldn't keep up.
Yep. And I remember feeling like we kind of gave the game away, not when we went flat, but just little mistakes we kept making where we couldn't give ourselves a cushion, right? To like, can you get up
It's
5
hard
to
when the
6
game's
points?
within 2 to 4 the whole game.
Yeah. Just kind of, can you give yourself a little cushion? Because Arizona, like to your point, has great players. Love is that kind of guy that, like you mentioned, when he hit those shots, you were saying how he can, late in a shot clock, he's someone that you don't mind heaving up that last second shot. Whereas, like, sometimes with us, when it's Demin or somebody's kind of just having to chuck something up, there's a couple of our players you're like, that's just not their strength. That's not what we want.
Yeah.
Arizona's kind of like, we can live with a Love deep three, at the end of a shot clock. Not ideal, but like, that's okay because he can do that. He can hit those.
Good point.
So I mean, I think you're right. I that was one of my takeaways just watching the Kansas game. I felt like it's the best I've seen Keba play. Probably the back-to-back 2 games that we've had. He's been a monster.
Been awesome. Yeah.
Blocks, like he was in like the 5 to 6 block range. I think both Kansas and Kansas State.
Yeah.
And I feel like his hands offensively, even like his footwork and his hand, like strong hands catching the ball, not letting it get tipped away or like hit out of his hands. He's I mean, I think he's been really good all season, and he's so athletic that he gives you, even when he hasn't maybe made a play, there's always a chance that he can get in there, contest. I think just having that presence is really helpful in the defensive side. But it's like he's also like coming through and like getting those results more often in these last 2 games. So I mean, I think if he can play well, it is tough because you're gonna definitely rely on him probably a little bit more just with Foos's size. I mean, he's a big dude, right? And he's hard to move around, but he is just doesn't have that height to really battle with, some of the bigs at times. He actually did pretty well against Dickinson when he was in there. He held his ground really well. So I mean, not saying it's like all up to Keba, but I think you're kind of spot on. If we can at least mitigate that, just looking at that 31 points on a really high, like 70+% shooting, that's going to make it hard for you to win the game, even if you're close like we were, with 7-8 minutes left in the game. And it's also my viewpoint too is coming off. I don't think this team is getting too high or too low, honestly. I listened to Kevin Young talk about before the Kansas game. He's like, well, yeah, everybody's talking about, Kansas just lost to Utah and they're, they want to win and they need to win.
Yeah.
And he's like, but like, we want to win too. Like I really like his mentality. He's very even keel. And I think I'm seeing that, I think, in the team seems to be more mentally consistent. I think even the last 2 games, how often I was texting one of my friends from back home that I grew up with. He texted me at halftime. He's like, what are the odds that BYU just blows this game, right? Yeah. And usually I'm like, it's got it written all over. I mean, you and I think we watched the tournament, the play-in game against, was it Ole Miss, where we were up big at half and just shot the game away, right?
Got to bring it up, huh? Just you had to go there.
Well, we got to get that out of the way so that we could let in some good vibes.
Okay. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's all my fault. Sorry. But it's like that's kind of been like BYU getting up big. We've seen a lot of collapses in the past against elite teams, Gonzaga. Like BYU's shown that they can do that in a first half, do what we did, but then to come out and do it again, and they've strung that together twice now. Against Kansas State and Kansas with a big lead. Kansas State not as good of a like out of the half showing, but we still ended up with a comfortable win. And in this game, it just felt like I think it was Richie even said in his post game, he said, we came out, it's 0-0, like, and Kevin Young essentially it sounds like he told him, like, let's step on their throats and end this thing. Like, we're not going to give any leeway. So
that's what I like. And I know we're a basketball podcast, but if we're going to bring some football into it, like, I love Kalani, like A+ coach. And I think some of this is overblown, but sometimes what fans is like, he's notorious for like taking a knee at like the 10-yard line, BYU's at 14. And I don't like disagree with that, but I know that sometimes like, if you want to call it criticism, it's like he doesn't just step on their throats enough. And I don't think that necessarily is meant fewer wins or losses for BYU. But to your point about like Kevin Young just like kind of stepping on like their throats or whatever, like the end of the Kansas, even 8 minutes left, BYU's up by 30. Like he was telling the team to go. He wasn't telling the back guys like run your offense, like keep going. Like he was just like full. And I think part of it is maybe just a coach's mentality. Like he probably had one game in the G League 15 years ago when he was the Delaware 76ers when it was 11:30 Eastern at night going against the Maine Bears. I don't know if the Maine Bears are on a team.
Whatever team it was.
Yeah, his team was probably up 30 with like 11 minutes left and they blew it. So because of that experience for his whole life, he's probably tells his team in the locker room, like, it could happen, but I was coaching the Delaware 76ers. And there's 17 fans in the stands, so there's actually no proof that it happened because there was no beat reporter on the game. It's BYU's probably his team's probably up 6 and they lost it where he's like embellishing it. They're up 30. There's probably that one random experience, but like whatever the genesis is, maybe it's just because he's just a killer, and I think part of it is he is. Like he was like the last minute, he's like, okay, like, yeah, just pull it back a little bit. Last 8 minutes, like, go, run your offense, like, Dallin. No, stop, go, keep going, throw it to the corner. And like, BYU went boom, 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 like, hit some more threes. So, like that, like you said, the coach's, like, demeanor does rub off on the team. So I think Kevin Young, just like his calmness, like, rubs off, just like, hey, when things get hectic, like, I think they know, like, when he's being calm, like, I think actually believe that he's calm and believe what he's saying because that's just kind of his personality. But that doesn't mean he's not, like, very intentional getting on his guys. Totally. And stuff. Like, so I think that was cool. I like seeing that's like, wow, he's like, BYU's up 30. He does not pussing around. Maybe he wanted to juice some of the metrics, get BYU bigger going, whatever the reason. Like, it was good. So obviously a lot of goodness, but I mean, I still, like, there's a reason this team is probably. I think they're in. If the tournament if the season ended today, I think they'd be in the tournament for sure. I think they've done enough. They have no bad losses. They have good wins. They'd probably avoid the first 4 game in Dayton. I think they'd probably be like a 10 seed right now. Kind of seems to be the consensus.
Just above that right now.
Yeah. But it's not a BYU team that's like we're talking like a 3 seed. So it's not like this team is without flaws. Like they could still, when they play really athletic front courts, they struggle. Like they have some good individual players, but they don't have like really elite kind of like isolation type players like getting a bucket for you down the stretch. There's been times like the Baylor game, BYU did really against that. Richie can be that, but they can struggle with that. Defensively, they still struggle. Like if they have a team with like multiple good guards, that could, and a lot of if a team is really good 3-point shooting, that could be a type of team BYU could really struggle with. And honestly, BYU hasn't played like a really good 3-point shooting teams recently. So, but like they're getting better. Like what they're doing defensively is night and day compared to like beginning of the Big 12 year was BYU. They were giving up threes to TCU was a bad team. Houston eviscerated them from the 3-point line. Utah they struggled with on both sides of the ball. So I think that's we talked about it before. I think Arizona gets them because Arizona is just a good front court. They have 2 good guards in Jaden and Caleb Love, and Jaden Bradley had a really good game against BYU last game. So maybe I'm curious like how BYU uses Mag maybe. Because Mag really shut down Jamal Small for Arizona State, West Virginia. Maybe they really put him on Caleb Love this game. It's like, hey, take out Caleb this game. We'll live with Jaden Bradley or someone going up to us. But I think the one key, Keba has to, like, as Awaka only had 4 offensive rebounds, but he got so many second chance points. He just kept stuff alive to allow other offensive rebounds. Like BYU, Keba's got to rebound like he had the last couple of games. BYU has to be better. Caleb Love, especially just in late, watch out for him in late shot clock situations. Don't be the shooter. But I think Arizona's home court, they just have a lot more weapons that's just gonna be hard for BYU to defend. So I think they probably win, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like, I think BYU could keep it close. They've been playing well, but I think I could see Arizona. They probably just go into maybe an 8-0 run or something, a couple of those to put it out of reach, and they probably win between 6 and 8. That's, I'd say, my prediction for the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd be too far off on that. I'll be interested to see what the line is when that comes out. But I mean, they were on a really hot tear. I just was looking when we were kind of I didn't realize when we played them.
Both teams were super hot.
Yeah, both teams were hot, and I mean it panned out in the game. They got a road win, which is really tough in college basketball, and I think that's kind of where I come from on. Will we beat Arizona? We can, but it's so hard to win on the road in college basketball. Like that's been my biggest takeaway the first 2 seasons being in the Big 12 is just like it's truly difficult. Even when you go to like when we lost at I'm trying to remember where it was, but I think it was Cincinnati. We got that was like a bad loss there, right? Just in terms of blown out. And they're kind of talking about, the like whatever arena Cincinnati plays in, like, this place is tough to play in. And I'm like, I've never once heard of this arena. There's no notoriety of any kind that I'm aware of in terms of like how difficult it is to play in Cincinnati. But I say that in the sense of it's true though, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like look how often we lost on the road in the WCC. Like it's just hard. It really is hard to win on the road in college basketball. Whether it's like the time zone changes, you're on those like road trip swings. It is. It's just like not just playing in an opponent's arena, but going somewhere else. That could be a benefit. The fact that it's like just straight down below Utah. Arizona's also right, like tons of BYU fans. So maybe it's not as bad of a trip to go down to Arizona, play Arizona and Arizona State as it would be to like head out west and play like West Virginia and Cincinnati back to back or something like that. Like where the time change is pretty big. The weather's a lot different. I don't know. That's probably reading a little too much into it, but it's just hard to win on the road. And I wouldn't have any like change of outlook on the team regardless of the outcome, like, or at least on a negative outcome. Like if we don't win or we look a little bit rusty or don't look great against them, like you said, it's a good point out that some of their strengths kind of go against our weaknesses as opposed to this Kansas game where it was kind of a perfect scenario of things BYU does really well matches up really good against the things that Kansas does not do well. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. I think the last thing, I guess, to tie out this Arizona game, I was looking at the box scores. I remember, like, Egor shot the ball 20 times that game and only had 3 assists with 4 turnovers. So as I'm like kind of, the juices are flowing as I remember back to that game earlier in the month. Like, Arizona guarded BYU very uniquely that game. Like, they were fine with Egor scoring. They're like, because they know it's in Egor's DNA to try to pass. Like when he comes off screens, like he's not necessarily looking to drive to the bucket. So Egor had some good drives that game. He's getting to the bucket, kept BYU close, but
I feel like that was a turn for him. Like that game, I feel like he was getting to the bucket more, and I was like, this is what we need.
Yeah. Like on one hand, like it was good. Like it was good to see that. But on the other hand, like BYU did not shoot well from 3. They shot less than 30%. As a part of it, like a lot of teams, like it's just their general nature to help a little bit off screens when someone kind of gets in the paint. Arizona was fine with Egor getting some occasional layups, but they forced him. He shot 9 threes, only made 2 that game. And like they were just covering shooters. So they were just like, they didn't bring the help as much. So it was good to see Egor get in the paint. But also it's just BYU's offense wasn't quite as on point, especially the last 10 minutes of the game, just because they were just clamping down on those shooters and kind of making Egor beat him one-on-one on offense, which isn't his strength to do consistently. Like he needs to, he gets his best when he's getting points off of the threat of him passing. So I'm curious to see how BYU changes up their offensive scheme a little bit, maybe to try to get a little bit more shooters open, because especially the last 10 minutes and just points of the game, BYU just couldn't get clean licks from 3, which is, if this BYU team's going to beat Arizona, they need to make more threes, because that's how this team is built.
Definitely. It's funny you mentioned, because that was literally, I remember kind of looking at the end and how did this game get away from us? And that was when I looked at how many shots that Egor took, like Egor had 20 shots, like you mentioned, and I kind of thought, well, he played pretty well. And then when I looked over and saw 9 of them were threes, I went, okay, that's kind of where they were successful in, because that's where you can definitely see like a struggle for him is late in the shot clock. There's a lot of, he'll try to give the ball up, and like someone will get the ball with like sub 5 to 3 seconds, and they have to jack something up, or he gets stuck in a situation where he knows he's clamped, he's not really getting separation, he's not getting in the lane, and he has to chuck something up. And I think a lot of those happen down that stretch at the end. You can kind of tell that's a game plan that teams are okay with. Like even in the Kansas game, you could tell there was possessions where they're kind of looking for, hey, can we isolate Egor with the ball with those in the last 10 seconds of the shot clock, and just kind of force him into an uncomfortable shot or pass. I think we've seen that happen, and like you said, it's really just because he can do a lot of other things really well, so they're trying to take away those passing lanes and prevent him from getting into the driving lanes, because he's, from what I've seen, they mentioned a stat, I can't remember it specifically, but it was something of his finishing percentage at the rim is extremely high. And it's something and it's so high that it's like everyone with that high of a finishing percentage that has these other metrics has always been drafted in the lottery type of thing, which speaks to his pro potential that we're all, that people tell us about. And some people are skeptical because he does struggle from 3 at times or struggles with the separation. Like you mentioned, there's some things in the NBA that will actually be easier for him, outside of college in terms of his style of play. But I think that was the big thing. Like I remember looking at the box score, and what jumped out to me was just that 9 3-point attempts by Demin, and you're just like, it's not his game. That's not in Kevin Young's game plan. That's
exactly what Arizona wanted. Exactly. They schemed, and BYU fell right into it.
Yep. And I'm curious, as you compare that, like even this game, he shot 5 against Kansas. He didn't have much going on this game, but he,
and there wasn't much bad for BYU, but there was a stretch. BYU scored 25 points in the first 8 minutes, and then there was that 5-minute stretch which they struggled. Part of it was Egor shot 2 threes late in the shot clock. BYU's offense kind of stalled, which just isn't his game. That's what defenses want. So I agree. I wanted to continue to get to the rim, but I'm curious to see how BYU counters to see if they could get a few more passing lanes for Egor with some of their actions. So it's hey, he's getting to the rim, but it's not just Arizona's fine with them shooting a 3 off of a pick and roll getting to the rim. It's hey, breaks down the defense, but then he whips out to Richie or Trevin for a 3. That's where it's he's the threat to score inside, but he's also a threat to pass. And if BYU could unlock both of those things, then they'll have a chance, because they're going to have to shoot better from 3 than they did versus Arizona the first time.
Definitely. Question for you: What? So at Arizona State, then we get West Virginia at home, go to Iowa State, then Utah at home. What's your prediction? What do you think we go those last 5 games?
I mean, logically, 3 or 2, 2 and 3 is the safest bet. Probably 3 and 2. BYU is going to be favored. They're for sure going to be favored Utah and West Virginia at home by probably 6, 7+ points. Arizona State's on the road. BYU probably favored 3 or 4 points. Arizona State's capable, but they've not been very good this year. They're at the bottom of the Big 12. There's going to be tons of BYU fans at that game, especially in the Phoenix area. Yeah. Arizona, Tucson, there's probably not a ton of fans there because they sell out the arenas. There's a ton of fans at the BYU game. Honestly, I think BYU beats those 3 games. So, if I want it to be safe, I think BYU would finish 3 and 2. Honestly, I think BYU loses this game and beats Iowa State next week. And it's not just I try to be very realistic. I watched a lot of Big 12 basketball. I watched a lot. And Iowa State's very good, and at Iowa State, it's very tough to play. They'll be favored by 7 or 8 points, and they're going to be a top 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. But they have good guards. They have Tamin Lipsey. They have Jones in the backcourt. Their guards don't scare me as much as Arizona, and I think BYU can neutralize them just enough. Iowa State's had some struggles in the last month a little bit, so maybe my prediction will change in a week. Maybe BYU gets boat raced by Arizona. I'm okay, maybe I was a little too blue-goggled. But, honestly, BYU doesn't have that. Like Kansas is probably the signature win, but it's not just like BYU hasn't beat like one of the teams that's going to be like a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Like I think BYU finishes 4-1. I think they lose to Arizona by, like I said, 6 to 8 points, and I think they win the last 4, including beating Iowa State. Like Iowa State, again, they're really good, but I think BYU could do just enough forcing him. They don't forcing him into some threes. I think they could do just enough with their guards to get the road upset. So that's my prediction. 3-2 would be like the safe pick, and 3-2 gets BYU in the tournament, probably gets them out of the first 4. Mm-hmm. But I think BYU could beat Iowa State, even though it's in Ames.
I like that. That's kind of my thought too, just in terms of those two, right? We've got 2 really good teams left on the schedule. I feel like they're more beatable as well for us. I was looking at Iowa State's schedule yesterday, and they have a pretty tough stretch because they're at Houston.
Yep.
And then they also play Arizona the game before us. So I mean, they've got 3 of the top 5 teams in the league that they're playing here down this stretch. I don't think I doubt. Well, I mean, it's hard to say. If we beat them, there's actually it's possible that we could actually push past them into the 4 spot.
Yeah. That's because BYU's 2 games behind them. Like BYU's is driver's seat for the 5 seed because the way the Big 12 tournament works, top 4 seeds get a double bye, 5-3 get a single bye. The 9 through 16 got to play that first day. So like BYU went 4-1, beat Iowa State. I mean, they won the tiebreaker, like you said, based on Iowa State's schedule. Like if BYU went 4-1, and then if Iowa State lost to Houston this weekend, even if BYU loses to Arizona, and then if they also lost to Arizona and to BYU. BYU just lost to Arizona. BYU would be the 4 seed.
Yeah.
So because BYU would win the tiebreaker. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably a tall order for Iowa State to lose 3 of their last 5, even though they are playing some good competition. But it's kind of cool. Like it's very possible that they could lose 2 of those games. Like you said, they could lose at Houston, lose to Arizona. And we've lost once, and it's kind of a game for the 4 seed in conference. I could see that panning out, which would be fun. Got to be fun to like play for that extra bye there. Still, both teams would still have to take care of business with their rival game, the next week, or they've got Kansas State not there, but it's a great position. I think we're in a good spot, and especially when the Big 12 has gotten deeper, right? Adding Arizona into the conference, we've expanded in that way, and it's cool to see that we're still right in the same spot as last year, but even is still a potential shot at a double bye, which would be nice. I think it'd be nice to avoid the 5 seed, right? You're going to play the winner of, if my math's when you're playing the winner of the 9-10 match, or
it'd be the winner of the 12-13 matchup.
Or that's right, yeah.
Because the 9-16 would play the 8 seed, right. And I'm just doing the trigonometry in my head. It would be the 12-13.
Calculating it. Nostradamus got the numbers flying around.
Yeah.
That's always like it's kind of a catch-22 at the 5 seed, right? Because you're like, great, we get a bye. Great, we're going to have a really good shot to advance to the quarters. But I mean, it's of all the conferences of any time, like you don't want to necessarily be playing, that team that just got a win the day before, and it's still not bad.
It could be against Cincinnati, who just smoked BYU a week ago. Like, there's a really good chance it's Cincinnati.
So it's kind of like, it's almost like you'd rather at least get all the way up into that top 4, or like it's almost better to potentially to be like in that 7 or 8 spot and play a team that's maybe a little bit better, so that if you do lose, potentially not as bad for you. So I'm not saying that that's like cut and dry that easy, but it is something that I've thought about when I thought we're in a good spot to have the 5 seed. It's a good spot to be in, but there is kind of that downside of, do we end up playing somebody that's still pretty solid? And that's the one thing, like, as you talk about us getting into the tournament off of like 3-2, which is very doable, right? Whatever the mix of the teams that we play, if we win 3 of the next 5, I think we're safely in and off the first 4 in. But that's the one thing that you'd want to avoid, right? Is playing a bad team in your tournament that could then, if you do lose to them, it would actually knock you down, as opposed to playing another good team that, if you if BYU wins their 5 seed game and then they go on and we play the 4 seed and it's Tech or Iowa State and you lose that game, doesn't matter, right? Like,
Yeah, no harm,
it's
no
not going to
foul.
affect you, but it could give you a bump if you win. So that's like the only thing that I kind of thought of was it would be nice to push up into that 4 seed spot because then you're really safe. You're going to play the winner of that 5 and then their matchup, which will most likely be the 5. And if not, you're getting that lower seed team on 2 games back to back. You're in a better position overall. So, but yeah, I think I'm with you. I think I could definitely see us going 4-1. And if we do that, I mean, I feel really good about the team if we pull that off and get a road win either way at Arizona or Iowa State. If you can pull off one of those, I think that puts us into a spot where, we're trying to push our seeding up a little bit, and we're not we're not worried about being in that first 4 in. Which to me, that's the biggest thing I'd like to avoid is just let's not have to play in Dayton. Let's just get into the tournament and go.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be thrilled, honestly, with 3-2 because I think you never know. It could be bid stealers at the end. So depending on what you got to do in the tournament, but if it was a 10 seed and void the first 4, like honestly, I'd be happy with that. I think BYU could beat a 7 seed in the first round, but I mean, we don't have to belabor the point. But yeah, if you beat, like, I read an article on Vanquish the Foe just today, and people listen to this tomorrow, whatever. I published it Wednesday, but like the big thing, like the big knocks on BYU's resume right now is like the non-conference strength of schedule. Like you can't do that. Like BYU, I mean, their best win was against North Carolina State, who's like awful. Like I think they were the team that they probably would have lost to the BYU Idaho intramural team that just won the other day. I think that's their postseason game. I think in Rexburg in the Hart Arena. I'm trying to remember what that's called. I think they're playing March 30th for there. I think it's already sold out. So
they're skipping NC State, skipping the NIT, and they're going to the BYU Idaho Invitational.
Yeah, the Rexburg Invitational. So and BYU just did nothing in non-conference. And then the other knock, which isn't necessarily a weakness, just BYU doesn't have. They don't have like that top tier win yet. Like there's quad 1 wins and there's quad 1A wins. And those quad 1A wins, like, because for example, like today, like as UCF's going to fall off a quad 1 because they just lost to Oklahoma State. But like as of this recording, UCF and at Houston will both be quad 1 games, but they're not obviously obviously win at Houston is much better. Like a quad 1A win is like those top, like top 15, top 40 on the road. So both of those would be quad 1A wins, especially be on the road. Like that would give BYU just another really good thing on its resume. BYU has no bad losses. Like, hey, they have this really good win. They have other solid wins. And I think you'd be looking at a single-digit seed at that point. So, and then you don't have to worry about the bubble at that point. So that's what's ahead for BYU at this Arizona game. If they win, you can start thinking about, okay, we're in the tournament. Now, can we get to the 7 seed? Maybe do run to the Big 12 tournament. Can we even get up to a 6 seed? And then if you're getting a 6 seed, like you could get a good chance to play in Denver, which is the closest Thursday, Saturday regional to you. You're close to home. You can have a lot of fans there. So, I mean, that's a lot to think about. I don't want to get ahead of myself because BYU still got to finish it. We've seen this BYU team before have some clunkers. But that's the Arizona game. It's exciting.
Definitely, man. Well, I like it. Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a good spot, and it's exciting just how we played, and it's nice to know that 3 wins is kind of the goal right now. Like if I'm from strictly the fan perspective, trying to keep like more of a level head and a less emotional, outlook. Hey, let's just try to win the games that we know we need to win. Let's compete in those other 2 tough road environments. And, like just knowing, hey, let's take care of business at home and at what is our other road? Are we at
Arizona State next week?
Arizona State. Just can we take care of those? And then if we do, we're sitting in a good spot. So it's exciting stuff. And I mean, I think the team. That's the best thing that I think is my main takeaway is the team looks better than we have all season. I think we're moving in the right direction, and that's very different from last season. Last season, it was like we had some highs, but we also had some lows near at the end. It was a lot of up and down, and it's ever since that initial start in Big 12 play, I feel like we're on an upward trajectory. We've had a couple clunkers, like you mentioned, like the Cincinnati loss was rough, but we've also I think that's just kind of, you're going to have that happen in Big 12 play. I mean, even the way that we beat Kansas kind of just shows you there's going to be some chaos, just like in, not to bring it back to football as well, but, part of how BYU had a great season in the Big 12 for football was just there was a lot of chaos. We were on the right side of a lot of chaotic games that we still gritted it out. We earned those wins, but it's just a really competitive league, and there's a lot of the schools are all invested. It's a lot of BYU type schools that have strong fan bases in their immediate area. So it's just there have been those. We've had some rough losses even as we've been improving, but I feel like that's my big takeaway. If I was to say just how am I feeling about the team, I think we look the best we have over the last couple games, and my hope is we can just keep it going these next couple weeks, because I was looking, it's crazy. The Final Four is here in San Antonio, and it's only it's 6 weeks away. Like, it's crazy. Like, I'm like, we're
coming up.
Here. Yep.
Yeah, it's exciting.
What would you say what's your kind of like takeaway right now from the team and where we're heading?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think BYU's playing their best ball right now of the season, but there's still some tough games going up. I'm curious, like, if BYU, I hope they could show. I don't want them to get blown up by Arizona. If they get blown up by Arizona, that would be a little discouraging at this point. It's like, hey, maybe it was Kansas kind of fool's gold.
Yeah,
a little bit.
That bad? Are they that broken?
Yeah, but I just want BYU to take care of business. 3-2 gets you in the tournament, could get you out the first four. 2-3 probably gets you in there. You're playing in Dayton. 1-4, you could get them, but you're really sweating. It probably depends if you get a win or two in the Big 12 tournament. So, yeah, I'm excited. It's crunch time. Like I said, there's really not much time. Like, your resume almost kind of it is what it is. Like, the bubble is kind of getting more clear. There's fewer opportunities for teams to play themselves on the bubble. There's still chances for teams to play themselves off the bubble. Fortunately, BYU doesn't have any more really bad games ahead of them to play themselves off the bubble, unless they just accumulated multiple 3 or 4 losses in a row. Yeah, I'm feeling good. Arizona's exciting. It's kind of one of those if you're expected to lose, no harm, no foul. But if you win, then you can just take your season to what could be in March.
Yeah, it's definitely a pivot point, I think, in terms of kind of a crossroads. Like, it's okay if we don't get there, but if we do, it can put us into a cool territory. So,
yeah, cool. I think should call that.
I feel good. Yeah. We'll do one after Arizona. Is that kind of our plan for the listeners? Like, we'll try to do one after each game, and we'll kind of recap the game and kind of look forward and talk about what's coming up.
Yeah. Bear with us. Thank you if you stuck with us this whole time. You're still listening. We appreciate you, Mom and Dad, for listening.
And our wives, if maybe they're kind enough to listen. We'll see.
I don't think so. We'll see.
Very doubtful.
Yeah. But no, we'll get better. We'll iterate. Maybe we'll get some fancy intro, outro music or something. I don't know how that would work, but we'll maybe figure something out. But appreciate everyone for joining, and we'll keep this going and finish this season, do some off season, and then just keep it rolling.
All right. Rise and hoop.
Yep.
We'll see y'all.